They found her just after sunrise, a young woman half buried in the snow beneath a pine tree, her skin blue-lipped and stiff, her dress frozen into the ground like roots. But what stopped Merritt wasn't the body. It was the tiny bear cub pressed against her chest, whimpering softly as its breath fogged in the cold air. The animal had dug a shallow trench with its paws, huddling close to her ribcage through the night, as if trying to shield her from the cold. Merritt, a midwife and trapper's daughter, had never seen anything like it. She stood there frozen, snow still falling softly on her shoulders, her gaze locked with the cub's wet brown eyes. It didn't growl or retreat. It just stared, panting, as if begging her not to take the woman away. The woman looked barely 20. Her hands were wrapped around something beneath her cloak, something the cub kept nudging with its nose, like it was trying to wake her. Merritt stepped closer, the crunch of her boots making the cub flinch. But it stayed. "She's not yours, little one," she whispered, kneeling carefully beside them both. The woman's skin was cold, but not hard. There was a pulse. Weak, barely there. Merritt's fingers trembled as she peeled back the edge of the cloak. Inside, tucked against the woman's chest, was a folded shawl and a sliver of dried meat, half-eaten and wet from the bear cub's drool. She'd been feeding it, keeping it alive. And it had returned the favor. Merritt blinked hard. She didn't believe in signs or spirits, but this was something else. The woman had no satchel, no papers, no boots, just a locket clutched in her right hand and 3 long claw marks torn across the back of her skirt, healed over, old. "You protected her," Merritt murmured, touching the cub's fur. It leaned into her palm with a soft cry. Then it did something she'd never forget. It lay back down against the woman's side, curled up, and closed its eyes, refusing to move. As if to say, "Not until she wakes up." By the time Merritt got her onto the sled, the cub still hadn't budged. She'd had to wrap the woman in every spare blanket and lay her flat with care, her skin like porcelain, breath so faint it fogged only in rhythm with the breeze. The cub padded beside the sled as Merritt pulled it toward the cabin, its paws leaving soft trails behind. It never barked or cried, just watched. Inside, Merritt lit the stove, set water to boil, and eased the stranger into the cot near the hearth. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, but not from cold. A scar ran beneath the tear, old, deep, purposeful. Someone had hurt her before the snow had. When Merritt tugged the cloak free, a locket slipped onto the floor. She opened it. Inside was a tiny scrap of fabric, and a name embroidered in hurried stitches, Junia. Merritt whispered it aloud without meaning to, and the woman stirred. Her lips moved, dry and cracked, forming the shape of that same name, but not as if claiming it, as if mourning it. Merritt leaned in. "Is that you, Junia?" The woman's eyes fluttered, but they didn't open. Instead, her hand twitched toward the cub curled against the hearth. "Is she your sister?" Merritt asked gently. "Your child?" No answer, just a shallow breath, and then silence again. The cub got up and walked to the cot, resting its chin on the woman's side. Merritt didn't move it. Something in her gut said this animal had held on to that girl's soul when the frost had nearly taken it. "You're not just any wild thing," she whispered to it. "You're carrying something sacred." She didn't know what was more unsettling, the woman with no past but a stitched name, or the bear cub that behaved like a child who wouldn't leave its mother. Merritt rose and threw another log into the fire. Outside, the wind howled and shook the shutters. But inside, 3 beings clung to a strange, silent bond. One barely alive, one trying to speak, and one that didn't need words at all. When morning came, The storm had buried the world in silence. Merritt stepped outside, squinting against the glare. Snow blanketed the pines so thickly the forest looked like it had forgotten color. But what stopped her wasn't the snow. It was the absence of tracks. The trail she and the sled had carved the night before was gone. And stranger still, no prints led to where she'd found the girl. No human boot prints, no sign of descent from the ridge above. Just one strange trail of paw prints, bare cub-sized, that began at the tree line and vanished behind her cabin. She turned to the door, heart thudding. The girl was still unconscious, lips pale, but her pulse had grown stronger. The cub hadn't moved from her side all night. It blinked at Merritt like it had been expecting her return. "Where did you come from?" she asked aloud. The cub only tilted its head. She checked the locket again. Junior. It didn't feel like the girl's name. It felt like a lost prayer. Merritt rummaged through a drawer for the small ledger she used to track border passers. A few fur traders had come through the month prior. No women, no mention of children. She moved to the hearth where the cub now dozed and saw something tucked beneath its body. Not fur, not wood. A scrap of cloth. She slid it out carefully. A child's mitt, hand-sewn, tiny, with the same embroidery thread as the name in the locket. It matched nothing the woman wore, which meant a fourth presence. Merritt's stomach turned. Someone else had been there. "Where's the baby?" she breathed. The cub stirred again, nudging its nose toward the back wall of the cabin, where the wood was damp from melted snow. It scratched once, then laid its paw flat against the boards. Merritt stared. "Are you trying to show me something?" she asked, half mocking herself. But the cub didn't move. She placed her palm beside its paw, lining them up. Something passed between them. An instinct, almost. Whatever had happened out there, this creature hadn't just survived it. It had come back with a message. One Merritt didn't yet understand. But soon would. The bear cub didn't move for a long while, as if waiting for her to act. Merritt stared at the damp spot its paw had marked on the cabin floor, heart thudding louder than the wind outside. She reached for the crowbar leaning by the hearth. "If you're wrong," she muttered, "I'm just tearing up perfectly good floor." But something deeper told her this wasn't foolish. It was necessary. She pried up the first board, just wet dirt. But beneath the second, she gasped. A pale cloth sack, carefully tied with leather cord, buried shallow beneath the earth. Merritt yanked it free, her hands trembling. The sack was soft and light, but something moved within. Her breath caught. She peeled it open. Inside lay a swaddled infant, eyes closed but breathing, wrapped not in a blanket but in a white lace wedding dress, bunched and folded as if meant to shield more than skin. "Dear Lord," she whispered, falling to her knees. The baby stirred and let out a single croaky cry, weak but alive. The bear cub leaned forward and licked the baby's foot once, then stepped back, watching Merritt like it was passing on a task. She looked at the wedding dress more closely. The hem was torn, stained with snowmelt and a smear of dried blood. The baby's tiny hand clutched the seam tightly, as if even in unconsciousness, it knew what it had been wrapped in. Merritt's voice cracked. "Who would bury a baby like this, and why would you—" She looked at the cub. "You dug her out, didn't you?" It blinked slowly. Merritt cradled the infant to her chest, trying to warm it with her body. It made a tiny sound, a whimper that sounded more like sorrow than need. She swore something ancient stirred in the room, as if the walls were listening. Then the girl in the bed, still unconscious, turned her head toward the fire and whispered a name, Iva. Merritt froze. Was that her own name? Or the baby's? Or someone else's entirely? She didn't know yet. But something told her that name, like the dress, the cub, the locket, was part of a puzzle just beginning to take shape. And now, she was in it, whether she wanted to be or not. Merritt barely slept that night. The infant, now nestled in a basket beside the hearth, was stable but still quiet, too quiet for a newborn. The girl on the bed had yet to wake, and the bear cub had curled itself tightly beneath the table, eyes never leaving the fire. As dawn crept in, painting frost against the windows, Merritt tried to make sense of the pieces. A girl with no name but Junia in a locket, a bear cub that had led her to a buried baby, and a wedding dress used as a shroud. She went to the wash basin, splashed her face with cold water, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked older than the 33 years she'd lived. Too many winters alone had carved that into her bones. But what startled her wasn't her reflection. It was the sound behind her. A voice. Small. Weak. "Where's the cub?" Merritt spun. The girl was sitting up, pale as the snowdrifts, shaking but awake. "He's right there," Merritt said softly, stepping closer. "He hasn't left you." The girl blinked at the bundle of fur under the table. "He waited." Her voice cracked, and she grabbed her side. Merritt knelt beside her. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" The girl didn't answer. Her eyes fell to the basket. She gasped. "No, she was—" And then she reached for the child with desperate hands. "Please," she choked. Is she breathing?" Merritt nodded. "Barely, but yes." Tears poured silently down the girl's cheeks. "I couldn't. I buried her. I thought she was already—" She sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. "They told me if I didn't do it, they'd make the bear finish what they started." Merritt froze. "Who?" "The ones who caught us crossing," the girl whispered. "We weren't supposed to survive." "We?" Merritt said gently. "You and the baby?" "No," the girl said, her eyes locked with Merritt's. "Me, the baby, and the boy who never made it out." She clutched her ribs again, her body curling with pain and memory. And that was when Merritt understood. The wedding dress hadn't come from a place of hope. It had come from a grave, and someone out there still believed they'd silenced the story it carried. By midday, the storm had lightened enough for Merritt to step outside. The girl, Junia, as Merritt now quietly accepted her to be, had drifted into a fragile sleep, the infant swaddled tightly against her chest. The bear cub still wouldn't leave their side. But something had shifted. The air no longer felt empty. Merritt kept her rifle slung across her shoulder as she circled the cabin. She wasn't looking for threats. She was looking for signs. And it didn't take long. Behind the woodshed, past the brush flattened by snowfall, was a single trail of footprints. Fresh, human, heavy, deep, heading toward the creek bed. She crouched and studied them. No snow inside the indentations meant they were recent. Too recent. She followed. Her boots sank into the crusted snow, and every step sounded louder than it should. These weren't the tracks of someone passing by. They paced, circled, paused. Someone had stood behind her cabin and watched for hours. And not just watched. Listened. The prints ended at the same place where the bear cub had scratched the wall, right beneath the spot where Merritt had found the child. Her spine stiffened. Whoever had left these didn't realize Merritt had already discovered what they tried to bury. Or worse. They knew. She hurried back to the cabin, bolting the door behind her. The girl stirred as Merritt added logs to the fire. "He was one of them," Junia whispered, eyes still closed. "Who?" Merritt knelt beside her. "One of the men who bought us," The one with the ring of keys. Merritt said nothing. Junia opened her eyes. They wanted the baby gone. She wasn't his. She was my sister's. Merritt blinked. Then whose wedding dress? My sister's, too. She died during labor. They blamed me. Junia looked down at the infant. She never cried when she was born. I thought she hadn't survived. I wrapped her up so the cold would finish what they started. But the cub... She paused. He never left her. Merritt stared at the creature now curled around the baby again, tail flicking gently. Why would a wild animal guard a child? Junia's lips trembled. Because he wasn't wild, not fully. He was raised near us. My sister fed him scraps. She called him Ghost. Merritt suddenly understood. The animal wasn't just protecting a child. He was guarding a memory, a promise, one someone still wanted erased. That night, long after Junia fell back asleep and the cub finally closed its eyes, Merritt couldn't. The story twisted through her thoughts like smoke through rafters. A child wrapped in a wedding dress, a sister who'd died in secret, and the girl before her, haunted, hunted, and somehow still holding on. She lit a lantern and slipped outside, clutching the knife she used for kindling. The air had gone still, cold as glass, but not cruel. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she retraced the footprints from earlier, this time looking for what hadn't been left behind. At the edge of the pines, she found it, a tree scarred by a blade, fresh cuts, shallow, deliberate. She raised the lantern. A symbol had been carved there. Not a name. A mark. 3 lines intersecting in a shape that made her stomach turn. She'd seen it once before, on the crate of stolen girls rescued from a trading route a year ago. That mark wasn't random. It belonged to men who dealt in flesh, not food. And now they were close again. Too close. She ran a hand over the gash in the bark, feeling its depth. Whoever left this wanted her to find it, a warning, or a claim. Merritt didn't frighten easily, but this wasn't just about fear. This was about the past rising like thawed rivers, dragging its rot to her door. She hurried back to the cabin, her breath sharp in her throat. Inside, the cub had shifted to lie directly on top of the baby, his small body warming hers like a second heartbeat. Junia stirred. You found it, didn't you? The mark? Merritt whispered. Yes. Junia closed her eyes again. That's why I ran. I saw it burned onto his ring. She nodded towards the infant. She's not just someone's child. She's their mistake. They tried to bury her and forgot the land remembers. Merritt crouched beside her. They're coming back for her, aren't they? Junia nodded once. Or to finish what they couldn't. Merritt touched her rifle. Then they'll find something they never planned on. Junia's eyes flicked open. What? Merritt glanced at the cub, then the baby, then Junia. Me. By morning, the tracks had returned. Deep, wide, slow-moving, wagon wheels, 3 of them. Merritt stood at the crest of the trail behind her cabin, heart clenched. No one used that path in winter. No one except those who didn't want to be seen. She returned inside, locking the door out of reflex, though she knew it would never hold if tested. Junia sat up now, pale but stronger. The cub hadn't left the baby's side all night. They're here, aren't they? Junia asked, voice low. Soon, Merritt said. How many? Too many. She crossed to the fireplace and took down her old revolver. It hadn't been used in years, but she kept it cleaned like a sacred thing. Junia's hands trembled as she reached for the baby. We can run. They'll smell your fear, Merritt said gently, and the baby's cold. Outside, a low groan of wheels confirmed it. Closer now. Merritt peeked through a slit in the window. 3 men, one of them with a silver ring catching the light. The symbol etched into it was the same that had been carved into the tree. Her stomach tightened. "He's here," Junia paled. "That man, he's not just after the baby, he's the one who—" She stopped, voice cracking. The cub growled low. It stood in front of the door, as if it had decided who it belonged to now. Merritt placed the baby in a bundle, handed it gently to Junia, and whispered, "If I fall, take the north trail. Hide where the icicles grow from rock. There's a ravine. No horses can follow." "And you?" Junia asked, voice trembling. Merritt looked down at the cub, then at the child in Junia's arms. "I already made peace long ago. I just never knew what for. Now I do." The first knock came, sharp, deliberate. "Open up, lady. We're just here for what's ours." Merritt's eyes burned as she stepped toward the door. "Then you should have taken better care of her." She didn't flinch as she unlatched the bolt. Behind her, the girl and the cub disappeared into shadow, clutching the one thing no man outside had ever held with honor: innocence. The door creaked open into blinding snowlight. 3 men stood there, faces weather-beaten, eyes sharp, their clothes too clean for this deep in the hills. The one in front, with the silver ring, smiled like he already owned the place. "You took something that don't belong to you," he said, glancing past Merritt like she was a broken gate. "No," Merritt replied calmly. "I kept something from being thrown away again." The ringed man stepped forward, hand on his belt. "She's marked. That child's part of a debt." Merritt didn't blink. "Then I guess I've become interest." Behind her, Junia crept toward the rear crawl space, baby swaddled tight, the bear cub pressed to her side like a guardian. The floor creaked. The man's hand twitched, and then, before Merritt could speak, he raised his pistol. But he never got the shot off. A low roar came from the loft. Deep, guttural, everyone froze. The cub had been just a warning. This was its mother. A full-grown she-bear lunged from the attic where it had hidden for days, crashing down like thunder, jaws wide and aimed straight for the silver ring. The men screamed. 2 fled. The ringed man fired once, wild, before the beast knocked him flat. Merritt didn't move. She knew. Somehow the cub had not followed Junia because it had been left. It had stayed behind because it had remembered what Merritt had once done, years ago, for a half-dead creature on her porch. The she-bear did not kill. She pinned the man, snarled close enough to frost his lashes, then turned and lumbered toward the back room. She stood before Junia and the child, sniffed the baby, then looked at Merritt one last time. And then, just as silently as she had come, she left, cub trailing close behind. When it was over, only the ringed man remained, curled and broken, eyes wide, not with pain but awe. You kept it alive," he whispered. Merritt stepped forward. "Number she did. I just gave her the choice. And for the first time in years, Merritt knew what kind of woman she'd become. Not a recluse, not a savior, just someone who'd once shown kindness to something that hadn't yet learned to hate. By spring, the snow had melted so fully that the trail to Merritt's porch was visible from half a mile away, rutted with paw prints and the careful steps of a woman learning to walk again. Junia now moved with quiet confidence, the child always near, the bear cub never far. The mother bear had not returned since that night. She'd done what she came to do. And everyone who had seen her that day in town, the day Merritt and Junia came to register the baby under a new name, knew better than to ask questions. Merritt had built a small pen just beyond the porch, not to cage anything, but to remind herself of boundaries between fear and faith, wildness and care, what's lost, and what might still be claimed. She wrote a letter to a man she hadn't seen in 9 years. Just one sentence. She lived, though you never thought she would. She mailed it, not expecting a reply. That was never the point. Junia had begun drawing again. Her pictures filled the cabin now, one of the baby holding the cub's ear like a blanket, one of a silver ring lying in the snow, and one of Merritt standing alone at the cabin door, her shadow taller than the cabin itself. "You should sign them," Merritt told her once. Junia smiled. "You signed them, I never would have made it here." But Merritt only shook her head. "I didn't save you. A cub did. I just didn't get in the way." That evening, Junia placed the final sketch on the windowsill. The bear cub curled around the baby by the hearth, both asleep, both safe. Outside, the forest exhaled. Somewhere far off, a shape moved through the trees, just out of reach, but never out of memory. And as Merritt stood watching it disappear into green, she knew. Some stories don't need to be retold. They just need to be lived once, with enough kindness that the world remembers. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more soul-deep stories here on Echoes of the West. If you'd seen that cub curled around her like that, would you have stepped in? Or just watched? Tell us below.